Chapter 7. The Illustrious Honeckers. Newt added these 3 postscripts to his letter. P.S. I can't sign myself fraternally yours because they won't let me be your brother on account of my grades. I was only a pledge, and now they're going to take even that away from me. P.P.S. You call our family illustrious, and I think you would maybe be making a mistake if you called it that in your book. I am a midget. For instance, 4 feet tall. And the last we heard of my brother Frank, he was wanted by the Florida police, and the FBI, and the Treasury Department for running stolen cars to Cuba on war surplus LSTs. So I'm pretty sure illustrious isn't quite the word you're after. Glamorous is probably closer to the truth. P.P.P.S. 24 hours later. I have reread this letter, and I could see where somebody might get the impression that I don't do anything but sit around and remember sad things and pity myself. Actually, I am a very lucky person, and I know it. I am about to marry a wonderful little girl. There is love enough in this world for everybody, if people will just look. I am proof of that. Chapter 8. Newt's thing was Zinka. Newt did not tell me who his girlfriend was, but about 2 weeks after he wrote to me, everybody in the country knew that her name was Zinka. Plain Zinka. Apparently she didn't have a last name. Zinka was a Ukrainian midget, a dancer with the Borzoi Dance Company. As it happened, Newt saw a performance by that company in Indianapolis before he went to Cornell. And then the company danced at Cornell. When the Cornell performance was over, little Newt was outside the stage door with a dozen long-stemmed American Beauty roses. The newspapers picked up the story when little Zinka asked for political asylum in the United States, and then she and little Newt disappeared. 1 week after that, little Zinka presented herself at the Russian embassy. She said Americans were too materialistic. She said she wanted to go back home. Newt took shelter in his sister's house in Indianapolis. He gave one brief statement to the press. It was a private matter, he said. It was an affair of the heart. I have no regrets. What happened is nobody's business but Zinka's and my own. One enterprising American reporter in Moscow, making inquiries about Zinka among dance people there, made the unkind discovery that Zinka was not, as she claimed, only 23 years old. She was 42, old enough to be Newt's mother. Chapter 9. Vice President in Charge of Volcanoes. I loafed on my book about the day of the bomb. About a year later, 2 days before Christmas, another story carried me through Ilium, New York, where Dr. Felix Honecker had done most of his work, where little Newt, Frank, and Angela had spent their formative years. I stopped off in Ilium to see what I could see. There were no live Honeckers left in Ilium, but there were plenty of people who had claimed to have known well the old man and his 3 peculiar children. I made an appointment with Dr. Asa Breed, Vice President in charge of the research laboratory of the General Forge and Foundry Company. I suppose Dr. Breed was a member of my cuirass, too, though he took a dislike to me almost immediately. Likes and dislikes have nothing to do with it, says Bokanon, an easy warning to forget. I understand you were Dr. Honecker's supervisor during most of his professional life, I said to Dr. Breed on the telephone. On paper, he said. I don't understand, I said. If I actually supervised Felix, he said, then I'm now ready to take charge of the volcanoes, the tides, and the migrations of birds and lemmings. The man was a force of nature no mortal could possibly control. Chapter 10. Secret Agent X9. Dr. Breed made an appointment with me for early the next morning. He would pick me up at my hotel on his way to work, he said, thus simplifying my entry into the heavily guarded research laboratory. So I had a night to kill in Ilium. I was already in the beginning and end of nightlife in Ilium, the Del Prado Hotel. Its bar, the Cape Cod Room, was a hangout for whores. As it happened, as it was meant to happen, Bokanon would say. The whore next to me at the bar and the bartender serving me had both gone to high school with Franklin Hoeniker, the bug tormentor, the middle child, the missing son. The whore, who said her name was Sandra, offered me delights unobtainable outside of Place Bagall in Port Said. I said I wasn't interested, and she was bright enough to say that she wasn't really interested either. As things turned out, we have both overestimated our apathies, but not by much. Before we took the measure of each other's passions, however, we talked about Frank Hoeniker, and we talked about the old man, and we talked about a little about Asa Breed, and we talked about the General Forge and Foundry Company, and we talked about the Pope and birth control, about Hitler and the Jews. We talked about phonies. We talked about truth. We talked about gangsters. We talked about business. We talked about the nice poor people who went to the electric chair, and we talked about the rich bastards who didn't. We talked about religious people who had perversions. We talked about a lot of things. We got drunk. The bartender was very nice to Sandra. He liked her. He respected her. He told me that Sandra had been chairman of the class colors committee at Ilium High. Every class, he explained, got to pick distinctive colors for itself in its junior year. Then it got to wear those colors with pride. What colors did you pick? I asked. Orange and black. Those are good colors. I thought so. Was Franklin Hoeniker on the class colors committee too? He wasn't on anything, said Sandra scornfully. He never got on any committee, never played any game, never took any girl out. I don't think he even ever talked to a girl. We used to call him Secret Agent X9. X9? You know, he was always acting like he was on his way between two secret places. Couldn't ever talk to anybody. Maybe he really did have a very rich secret life, I suggested. Nah. Nah, sneered the bartender. He was just one of those kids who made model airplanes and jerked off all the time. Chapter 11. Protein. He was supposed to be our commencement speaker, said Sandra. Who was? I asked. Dr. Hoeniker, the old man. What did he say? He didn't show up. So you didn't get a commencement address? Oh, we got one. Dr. Breed, the one you're going to see tomorrow, he showed up all out of breath, and he gave some kind of talk. What did he say? He said he had hoped a lot of us would have careers in science. She didn't see anything funny in that. She was remembering a lesson that had impressed her. She was repeating it gropingly, dutifully. He said, the trouble with the world was... She had to stop and think. The trouble with the world was... She continued hesitatingly. That people were still superstitious instead of scientific. He said if everybody would study science more, there wouldn't be all the trouble there was. He said science was going to discover the basic secret of life someday, the bartender put in. He scratched his head and frowned. Didn't I read in the paper the other day where they'd finally found out what it was? I missed that. I murmured. I saw that, said Sandra, about 2 days ago. That's right, said the bartender. What is the secret of life? I asked. I forget, said Sandra. Protein, the bartender declared. They found out something about protein. Chapter 12. End of the World Delight. An older bartender came over to join in our conversation in the Cape Cod room of the Del Prado. When he heard that I was writing a book about the day of the bomb, he told me what the day had been like for him, and what the day had been like in the very bar in which we sat. He had a W.C. Fields twang, and a nose like a prize strawberry. It wasn't the Cape Cod room then, he said. We didn't have all these fucking nets and seashells around. It was called the Navajo teepee in those days. He had Indian blankets and skulls on the walls. Had little tom-toms on the tables. People were supposed to beat on the tom-toms when they wanted service. They tried to get me to wear a war bonnet, but I wouldn't do it. A real Navajo Indian came here one day, told me Navajos didn't live in teepees. That's a fucking shame, I told him. Before that, it was the Pompeii room, with busted plaster all over the place. But no matter what they called the room, they never changed the fucking light fixtures. Never changed the fucking people who come in or the fucking town outside either. The day they dropped Honegger's fucking bomb on the Japanese, a bum came in and tried to scrounge a drink. He wanted me to give him a drink on account of the world was coming to an end. So I mixed him an end of the world delight. I gave him about half pint of creme de menthe and a hollowed-out pineapple with whipped cream and a cherry on top. There, you pitiful son of a bitch, I said to him. Don't say I never did anything for you. Another guy came in and he said he was quitting his job at the research lab. Said anything a scientist worked on was sure to wind up as a weapon, one way or another. Said he didn't want to help politicians with their fucking wars anymore. Name was Breed. I asked him if he had any relation to the boss of the fucking research laboratory. He said he fucking well was. He said he was the boss of the research laboratory's fucking son. Chapter 13. The Jumping Off Place. Oh, God, what an ugly city Ilium is. Ah, God, says Bokanon, what an ugly city every city is. Sleet was falling through a motionless blanket of smog. It was clearly morning. I was riding in the Lincoln sedan of Dr. Asa Breed. I was vaguely ill, still a little drunk from the night before. Dr. Breed was driving. Tracks of a long-abandoned trolley system kept catching the wheels of his car. Breed was a pink old man, very prosperous, beautifully dressed. His manner was civilized, optimistic, capable, serene. I, by contrast, felt bristly, diseased, cynical. I had spent the night with Sandra. My soul seemed as foul as smoke from burning cat fur. I thought the worst of everyone, and I knew some pretty sordid things about Dr. Asa Breed, things Sandra had told me. Sandra told me everyone in Ilium was sure that Dr. Breed had been in love with Felix Honecker's wife. She told me that most people thought Breed was the father of all 3 Honecker children. Do you know Ilium at all? Dr. Breed suddenly asked me. This is my first visit. It's a family town. Sir? There isn't much in the way of nightlife. Everybody's life pretty much centers around his family and his home. That sounds very wholesome. It is. We have very little juvenile delinquency. Good. Ilium has a very interesting history, you know. That's very interesting. It used to be the jumping off place, you know. Sir? For the Western migration. Oh, people used to get outfitted here. That's very interesting. Just about where the research laboratory is now was the old stockade. That was where they held the public hangings, too, for the whole county. I don't suppose crime paid any better then than it does now. There was one man they hanged here in 1782 who had murdered 26 people. I've often thought somebody ought to do a book about him sometime. George Minor Moakley. He sang a song on the scaffold. He sang a song he'd composed for the occasion. What was the song about? You can find the words over at the Historical Society if you're really interested. I just wondered about the general tone. He wasn't sorry about anything. Some people are like that. Think of it, said Dr. Breed. 26 people he had on his conscience. The mind reels, I said. Chapter 14. When automobiles had cut glass vases. My sick head wobbled on my stiff neck. The trolley tracks had caught the wheels of Dr. Breed's glossy Lincoln again. I asked Dr. Breed how many people were trying to reach the General Forge and Foundry Company by 8 o'clock, and he told me 30,000. Policemen in yellow rain-capes were at every intersection, contradicting their white-gloved hands with what the stop-and-go sign said. The stop-and-go signs, garish ghosts in the sleet, went through their irrelevant tomfoolery again and again, telling the glacier of automobiles what to do. Green meant go. Red meant stop. Orange meant change and caution. Dr. Bree told me that Dr. Honecker, as a very young man, had simply abandoned his car in Ilium traffic one morning. The police were trying to find out what was holding up traffic, he said. Found Felix's car in the middle of everything. Its motor running, a cigar burning in the ashtray, fresh flowers in the vases. Vases? It was a Marmon, about the size of a switch engine. It had little cut glass vases on the doorposts, and Felix's wife used to put fresh flowers in the vases every morning. And there that car was in the middle of traffic. Like the Marie Celeste, I suggested. The police department hauled it away. They knew whose car it was, and they called up Felix, and they told him very politely where his car could be picked up. Felix told them they could keep it, that he didn't want it anymore. Did they? No. They called up his wife, and she came out and got the Marmon. What was her name, by the way? Emily. Dr. Breed licked his lips. He got a faraway look, and he said the name of the woman, a woman so long dead, again. Emily. Do you think anybody would object if I used the story about the Marmon in my book? I asked. As long as you don't use the end of it. The end of it? Emily wasn't used to driving the Marmon. She got into a bad wreck on the way home. It did something to her pelvis. The traffic wasn't moving just then. Dr. Breed closed his eyes and tightened his hands on the steering wheel. And that was why she died when little Newt was born. Chapter 15. Merry Christmas. The research laboratory of the General Forge and Foundry Company was near the main gate of the company's Ilium works, about a city block from the executive parking lot where Dr. Breed put his car. I asked Dr. Breed how many people worked for the research laboratory. 700, he said, but less than 100 are actually doing research. The other 600 are all housekeepers in one way or another, and I am the chiefest housekeeper of all." When we joined the mainstream of mankind in the company street, a woman behind us wished Dr. Breed a Merry Christmas. Dr. Breed turned to peer benignly into the sea of pale pies and identified the greeter as one Miss Francine Pefko. Miss Pefko was 20, vacantly pretty and healthy, a dull normal. In honor of the dulcitude of Christmas time, Dr. Breed invited Miss Pefko to join us. He introduced her as the secretary of Dr. Nilsak Horvath. He then told me who Horvath was. "The famous service chemist," he said. "The one who's doing such wonderful thing with films." "What's new in surface chemistry?" I asked Miss Pefko. "God," she said. "Don't ask me. I just type what he tells me to type." And then she apologized for having said God. "Oh, I think you understand more than you let on," said Dr. Breed. "Not me," said Miss Pefko. She wasn't used to chatting with someone as important as Dr. Breed, and she was embarrassed. Her gait was affected, becoming stiff and chicken-like. Her smile was glassy, and she was ransacking her mind for something to say, finding nothing in it but used Kleenex and costume jewelry. "Well," rumbled Dr. Breed expansively, "how do you like us, now that you've been with us, how long? Almost a year?" "You scientists think too much," blurted Miss Pefko. She laughed idiotically. Dr. Breed's friendliness had blown every fuse in her nervous system. She was no longer responsible. "You all think too much." A winded, defeated-looking fat woman in filthy coveralls trudged beside us. Hearing what Miss Pefko said, she turned to examine Dr. Breed, looking at him with helpless reproach. She hated people who thought too much. At that moment, that she struck me as an appropriate representative for almost all of mankind. The fat woman's expression implied that she would go crazy on the spot if anybody did any more thinking. "I think you'll find," said Dr. Breed, "that everybody does the same amount of thinking. Scientists simply think about things in one way, and other people think about things in others," gurgled Miss Pefko emptily. "I take dictation from Dr. Horvath, and it's just like a foreign language. I don't think I'd understand, even if I was to go to college. And here he's maybe talking about something that's going to turn everything upside down and inside out, like the atom bomb. When I used to come home from school, Mother used to ask me what happened that day, and I'd tell her," said Miss Pefko. "Now I come home from work and she asks me the same question, and all I can say is—" Miss Pefko shook her head and let her crimson lips flap slackly. "I don't know. I don't know. I don't know." "If there's something you don't understand," urged Dr. Breed, "ask Dr. Horvath to explain it. He's very good at explaining." He turned to me. "Dr. Honecker used to say that any scientist who couldn't explain to an 8-year-old what he was doing was a charlatan." "Then I'm dumber than an 8-year-old," Miss Pefko mourned. "I don't even know what a charlatan is." Chapter 16. Back to kindergarten. We climbed the 4 granite steps before the research laboratory. The building itself was of unadorned brick and rose 6 stories. We passed between 2 heavily armed guards at the entrance. Miss Pefko showed the guard on the left the pink confidential badge at the tip of her left breast. Dr. Breed showed the guard on our right the black top-secret badge on his soft lapel. Ceremoniously, Dr. Breed put his arm around me without actually touching me, indicating to the guards that I was under his august protection and control. I smiled at one of the guards. He did not smile back. There was nothing funny about national security. Nothing at all. Dr. Breed, Miss Pefko, and I moved thoughtfully through the laboratory's grand foyer to the elevators. "Ask Dr. Horvath to explain something sometime," said Dr. Breed to Miss Pefko. "See if you don't get a nice, clear answer." "He'd have to start back in the first grade, or maybe even kindergarten," she said. "I missed a lot." "We all missed a lot," Dr. Breed agreed. "We'd all do well to start over again, preferably with kindergarten." We watched the laboratory's receptionist turn on the many educational exhibits that lined the foyer's walls. The receptionist was a tall, thin girl, icy and pale. At her crisp touch, lights twinkled, wheels turned, flasks bubbled, bells rang. "Magic," declared Miss Pefko. "I'm sorry to hear a member of the laboratory family using that brackish, medieval word," said Dr. Breed. "Every one of those exhibits explains itself. They're designed so as not to be mystifying. They're the very antithesis of magic." "The very what of magic?" "The exact opposite of magic." "You couldn't prove it by me." Dr. Breed looked just a little peeved. "Well," he said, "we don't want to mystify. At least give us credit for that." Chapter 17. The Girl Pool. Dr. Breed's secretary was standing on her desk in his outer office tying an accordion-pleated Christmas bell to the ceiling fixture. "Look here, Naomi," cried Dr. Breed. "We've gone 6 months without a fatal accident. Don't you spoil it by falling off the desk." Miss Naomi Faust was a merry, desiccated old lady. I suppose she had served Dr. Breed for almost all his life, and her life too. She laughed. "I'm indestructible, and even if I did fall, Christmas angels would catch me." "They've been known to miss." 2 paper tendrils, also accordion-pleated, hung down from the clapper of the bell. Miss Faust pulled one. It unfolded stickily and became a long banner with a message written on it. "Here," said Miss Faust, handing the free end to Dr. Breed. "Pull it the rest of the way and tack the end to the bulletin board." Dr. Breed obeyed, stepping back to read the banner's message. "Peace on earth," he read out loud heartily. Miss Faust stepped down from her desk, with the other tendril, unfolding it. "Goodwill toward men," the other tendril said. "By golly," chuckled Dr. Breed. "They've dehydrated Christmas. The place looks festive, very festive." "And I remembered the chocolate bars for the girl pool, too," she said. "Aren't you proud of me?" Dr. Breed touched his forehead, dismayed by his forgetfulness. "Thank God for that. It slipped my mind." "We mustn't ever forget," said Miss Faust. "It's a tradition now. Dr. Breed and his chocolate bars for the girl pool at Christmas." She explained to me that the girl pool was the typing bureau in the laboratory's basement. The girls belonged to anybody with access to a dictaphone. All year long, she said, the girls of the girl pool listened to the faceless voices of scientists on dictaphone records brought in by male girls. Once a year, the girls left their cloister of cement block to go a-caroling, to get their chocolate bars from Dr. Asa Breed. They serve science, too, Dr. Breed testified, even though they may not understand a word of it. God bless 'em, everyone. Chapter 18. The most valuable commodity on earth. When we got into Dr. Breed's inner office, I attempted to put my thoughts in order for a sensible interview. I found that my mental health was not improved. And when I started to ask Dr. Breed questions about the day of the bomb, I found that the public relations centers of my brain had been suffocated by booze and burning cat fur. Every question I asked implied that the creators of the atomic bomb had been criminal accessories to murder so foul. Dr. Breed was astonished, and then he got very sore. He drew back from me and he grumbled, "I gather you don't like scientists very much." "I wouldn't say that, sir. All your questions seem aimed at getting me to admit that scientists are heartless, conscienceless, narrow boobies, indifferent to the fate of the rest of the human race. Or maybe not really members of the human race at all." That's putting it pretty strong. No stronger than what you're going to put into your book, apparently. I thought that what you were after was a fair, objective biography of Felix Honecker. Certainly as significant a task as a young writer could assign himself in this day and age. But no, you come here with preconceived notions about mad scientists. Where did you ever get such ideas? From the funny papers? From Dr. Honecker's son, to name one source. Which son? Newton, I said. I had little Newt's letter with me and I showed it to him. How small is Newt, by the way? No bigger than an umbrella stand, said Dr. Breed, reading Newt's letter and frowning. The other two children are normal? Of course. I hate to disappoint you, but scientists have children just like anybody else's children. I did my best to calm down Dr. Breed, to convince him that I was really interested in an accurate portrait of Dr. Honecker. I've come here with no other purpose than to set down exactly what you tell me about Dr. Honecker. Newt's letter was just the beginning, and I'll balance off against it whatever you can tell me. I'm sick of people misunderstanding what a scientist is, what a scientist does. I'll do my best to clear up the misunderstanding. In this country, most people don't even understand what pure research is. I'd appreciate it if you'd tell me what it is. It isn't looking for a better cigarette filler, or a softer face tissue, or a longer-lasting house paint, God help us. Everybody talks about research, and practically nobody in this country's doing it. We're one of the few companies that actually hires men to do pure research. When most other companies brag about their research, they're talking about industrial hack technicians who wear white coats, work out of cookbooks, and dream up an improved windshield wiper for next year's Oldsmobile. But here, and shockingly few other places in this country, men are paid to increase knowledge, to work toward no end but that. Nothing generous about it. New knowledge is the most valuable commodity on the earth. The more truth we have to work with, the richer we become. Had I been a broken honest then, that statement would have made me howl. Chapter 19. No more mud. Do you mean, I said to Dr. Breed, That nobody in this laboratory is ever told what to work on? Nobody even suggests what they work on? People suggest things all the time, but it isn't in the nature of a pure research man to pay attention to suggestions. His head is full of projects of his own, and that's the way we want it. Did anybody ever try to suggest projects to Dr. Honecker? Oh, certainly. Admirals and generals in particular. They looked upon him as some sort of magician who would make America invincible with a wave of his wand. They brought all kinds of crackpot schemes in up here. Still do. The only thing wrong with the schemes is that, given our present state of knowledge, the schemes won't work. Scientists on the order of Dr. Honecker are supposed to fill the little gaps. I remember, shortly before Felix died, there was a Marine general who was hounding him to do something about mud. Mud? The Marines, after almost 200 years of wallowing in the mud, were sick of it, said Dr. Breed. The general, then, as their spokesman, felt that one of the aspects of progress should be that Marines no longer had to fight in mud. What did the general have in mind? The absence of mud. No more mud. I suppose, I theorized, it might be possible with mountains of some sort of chemical or tons of some sort of machinery. What the general had in mind was a little pill or a little machine. Not only were the Marines sick of mud, they were sick of carrying cumbersome objects. They wanted something little to carry for a change. What did Dr. Honecker say? In his playful way, and all his ways were playful, Felix suggested that there might be a single grain of something, even a microscopic grain, that could make infinite expanses of muck, marsh, swamp, creeks, pools, quicksand, and mire as solid as this desk. Dr. Breed banged his speckled old fist on the desk. The desk was a kidney-shaped, sea-green steel affair. One Marine could carry more than enough of the stuff to free an armored division bogged down in the Everglades. According to Felix, one Marine could carry enough of the stuff to do that under the nail of his little finger. That's impossible. You would say so. I would say so. Practically everybody would say so. To Felix, in his playful way, it was entirely possible. The miracle of Felix, and I sincerely hope you'll put this in your book somewhere, was that he always approached old puzzles as though they were brand new. I feel like Francine Pefko now, I said. And all the girls in the girl pool, too. Dr. Honecker could never have explained to me how something that could be carried under a fingernail can make a swamp as solid as your desk. I told you what a good explainer Felix was. Even so, he was able to explain it to me, said Dr. Breed. And I'm sure I can explain it to you. The puzzle is how to get Marines out of the mud, right? Right. All right, said Dr. Breed. Listen carefully. Here we go. Chapter 20. Ice 9. There are several ways, Dr. Breed said to me, in which certain liquids crystallize, can freeze. Several ways in which their atoms can stack and lock in an orderly, rigid way. That old man with spotted hands invited me to think of the several ways in which cannonballs might be stacked on a courthouse lawn, of the several ways in which oranges might be packed into a crate. So it is with atoms and crystals too, and two different crystals of the same substance can have different physical properties. He told me about a factory that had been growing big crystals of ethylene diamine tartrate. The crystals were used in certain manufacturing operations, he said, but one day the factory discovered that the crystals it was growing no longer had the properties desired. The atoms had begun to stack and lock, to freeze, in a different fashion. The liquid that was crystallizing hadn't changed, but the crystals it was forming were, as far as industrial applications went, pure junk. How this had come about was a mystery. The theoretical villain, however, was what Dr. Breed called a seed. He meant by that a tiny grain of the undesired crystal pattern. The seed, which had come from God only knows where, taught the atoms the novel way in which to stack and lock, to crystallize, to freeze. Now think about cannonballs on a courthouse lawn, or about oranges in a crate again, he suggested. And he helped me to see that the patterns of the bottom layer of cannonballs or oranges was determined how each subsequent layer would stack and lock. The bottom layer is the seed of how every cannonball or every orange that comes after it is going to behave, even to an infinite number of cannonballs and oranges. Now suppose, chortled Dr. Breed, enjoying himself, that there were many possible ways in which water could crystallize, could freeze. Suppose that the sort of ice we skate upon and put into highballs, what we might call ice one, is only one of several types of ice. Suppose water always froze as ice one on Earth because it had never had a seed to teach it how to form ice two, ice three, ice four. And suppose, he rapped on his desk with his old hand again, a crystal as hard as this desk, with a melting point of, let's say, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, or better still, a melting point of 133 degrees. 130 degrees. All right, I'm still with you, I said. Dr. Breed was interrupted by whispers in his outer office. Whispers loud and portentous. They were the sound of the girl pool. The girls were preparing to sing in the outer office. And when they did, Dr. Breed and I appeared in the doorway. Each of about 100 girls had made herself into a choir girl by putting on a collar of white bond paper, secured by a paper clip. They sang beautifully. I was surprised and mawkishly heartbroken. I'm always moved by that seldom used treasure, the sweetness with which most girls can sing. They sang, "O Little Town of Bethlehem." I am not likely to forget very soon their interpretation of the line. The hopes and fears of all the years are here with us tonight. Chapter 21. The Marines March On. When old Dr. Breed, with the help of Miss Faust, had passed out the Christmas chocolate bars to the girls, we returned to his office. There, he said to me, "Where were we? Oh, yes. And that old man asked me to think of the United States Marines in a God-forsaken swamp. Their trucks and tanks and howitzers are wallowing," he complained, "sinking and stinking miasma and ooze." He raised a finger and winked at me. "But suppose, young man, that one Marine had with him a tiny capsule containing a seed of Ice 9. A new way for the atoms of water to stack and lock, to freeze. If that Marine threw that seed into the nearest puddle, the puddle would freeze?" I guessed. "And all the muck around the puddle, it would freeze? And all the puddles in the frozen muck, they would freeze? And the pools and the streams in the frozen muck, they would freeze?" "You bet they would," he cried, "and the United States Marines would rise from the swamp and march on." Chapter 22. Member of the Yellow Press. "There is such stuff?" I asked. No, 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 said Dr. Breed, losing patience with me again. I only told you all this in order to give you some insight into the extraordinary novelty of the ways in which Felix was likely to approach an old problem. What I've just told you is that he told the Marine general who was hounding him about mud. Felix ate alone here in the cafeteria every day. It was a rule that no one was to sit with him, to interrupt his chain of thought. But the Marine general barged in, pulled up a chair, and started talking about mud. What I've told you was Felix's offhand reply. There really isn't such a thing. I just told you that it wasn't, cried Dr. Breed hotly. Felix died shortly after that. And if you'd been listening to what I've been trying to tell you about pure research men, you wouldn't ask such a question. Pure research men work on what fascinates them, not on what fascinates other people. I keep thinking about that swamp. You can stop thinking about it. I've made the only point I wanted to make with the swamp. If the streams flowing from the swamp froze as ice 9, what about the rivers and lakes and the streams? They'd freeze, but there's no such thing as ice 9. And the oceans the frozen rivers fed? They'd freeze, of course, he snapped. I suppose you're going to rush to market with a sensational story about Ice 9 now. I'll tell you again, it does not exist. And the springs feeding the frozen lakes, and streams, and all the water underground feeding the springs? They'd freeze, damn it, he cried. But if I had known that you were a member of the Yellow Press, he said grandly, rising to his feet, I wouldn't have wasted a minute with you. And the rain? When it fell, it would freeze into hard little hobnails of ice 9. That would be the end of the world. And the end of the interview, too. Goodbye.